Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Maggie Thomas. I am the Deputy Chief of Talent Development for District of Columbia Public Schools, and we just welcome you to today's webinar. I know this is a part of a series of webinars really focused on supporting the role of the principal. So we're very excited to talk to you today about the recruitment, selection, both teachers and school leaders in light of COVID and beyond. Again, my name is Maggie Thomas. I'll be one of your hosts today, and I'd like to introduce the speakers that will be joining us momentarily. Before I do, I want to just tell you a little bit about DCPS. We are a school district of 50,000 students covering more than 115 school campuses, and we're very excited for the second cycle in a row. The NAEP has assigned us as the fastest improving urban school district in the nation. We're very, very proud of that collective work that we've been journeying towards, and specifically in our roles in the Talent Development Division, we focus strategically on how we get, grow, and keep our top talent. We know that in order to make sure that our mission is lifted up of ensuring that our students have a world-class education, we need to have top talent in front of all of our kids and top leaders at the helm leading our schools. So with that said, I have a few team members that I would like to introduce themselves, and we're going to hop right in. JuDonn, can you go ahead and start?
Hey, good people. My name is JuDonn DeShields. I'm a Director of Learning for Leadership Development. We're really excited to engage with you all this afternoon, and I want to kick it to my colleague, Sheena Hardy.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Sheena Hardy. I'm also one of the directors of learning on the leadership development team, and work closely with our school leader selection and recruitment process. So really excited to engage in this conversation today. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Veronica.
Thanks, Sheena. Hi, everyone. My name is Veronica Alvarado, and I manage our teacher recruitment and pipelines team here at DCPS. Our team oversees all of the ways we get great teacher talent for our district. I'm very excited to be joining my colleagues in sharing more about our talent work. And I'll go ahead and pass it all over to Leslie.
Thanks, Veronica. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leslie Edwards. I'm also one of the directors of learning on the leadership development team. I'll also serve as today's moderator, and so I truly look forward to digging into this conversation together. To note, if you have any questions throughout this webinar, please notate them in the chat. We have strategically placed some Q&A stop points throughout the webinar so we can address those questions. Veronica, we're going to start with you. We want to find out more about teacher recruitment and selection. Can you talk to us a bit about how your team pivoted to being 100% virtual and what that actually looked like for teacher recruitment and selection?
Yes, definitely. You can go ahead and switch slides. So in the weeks leading up to our team moving to an all virtual environment, we were already seeing signs that we would need to reevaluate our current strategies and do so pretty quickly. So, we came together as a team to rethink our strategy and plan our next steps while ensuring that not only we could still connect with the quantity and quality of candidates we needed, but that we were also continuing to weave in our value of equity into every step of our process from that point forward. So in terms of our overall approach to both recruitment and selection, there are really three key areas where we made some intentional and strategic shifts. The first being this concept of access. In an all virtual world, access was absolutely critical just to ensure that we had an equitable process for all of our stakeholders. And as a team, we needed to make sure that candidates still had access to our application process, as well as that information needed to engage with our team. Thankfully, much of the support we had already been providing up to this point had been built out and accessible virtually, and the majority of our process was already kind of taking place remotely. At DCPS, we have a very comprehensive selection process that includes an initial application, phone interview with a current DCPS teacher, as well as a teaching sample for some of our candidates as well. The area where we really did need to make some readjustments was with regard to our strategic recruitment efforts. With in-person events being canceled, we needed to find new ways to access and recruit prospective candidates. And some of the ways that we did this was by way of signing up to attend virtual recruitment fairs, offering to engage in one-on-one conversations with prospective candidates, and also planning webinars led by our recruiters to share information with hundreds of candidates at once and then following up with them afterwards. I would say another piece of our shift to being 100% virtual was also our focus on targeted marketing. We really focused on increasing social media marketing on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, as well as increasing the overall number of job postings for our hardest to staff subject areas. And then beyond this, I think we were really thoughtful and intentional about increasing marketing, specifically for both our male educators of color and bilingual candidates. So this included postings and ads on websites, as well as the job boards of minority serving institutions, as well as organizations. Particularly for our bilingual educators, I would also note, this meant ensuring that our marketing and support materials were available in both English and Spanish, so that we were providing an equitable experience regardless of linguistic ability.
We truly appreciate the intentionality there, Veronica, on your team's part. Building off about what you described as it being an equitable process, can you talk more explicitly about how your team was able to navigate that transition?
Yeah, definitely. So as a team, we had been doing a lot of thinking over the past year, specifically around how we can bring in elements of human-centered design into our core work. So in going 100% virtual, we decided to make a very intentional shift to a human-centered approach to all aspects of our recruitment and selection work. So in the midst of a global health pandemic, candidates were going through a lot personally and professionally. So we really had to consider how to best support them as humans first. So in recruitment, this looked like our team sending out personalized emails to candidates and offering one-on-one support and guidance. We also held a panel webinar in collaboration with our Male Educators of Color Collaborative that created a safe space for our prospective Black and Latinx male educators to connect and engage in some candid conversations. With our selection work, the focus was on cultivating candidates, again, with that human-centered approach. One of the things our team did was conduct hundreds of phone calls with candidates, not just to encourage them to apply and support them with our application process, but also just to check in on them personally. And this actually led to us seeing a tremendous increase in our conversion rate, actually over 70%, which is higher than what we've seen in past years. And again, with this, I would note that weaving in equity and inclusion at the forefront of everything that we did, we prioritized conducting calls as well as responding to messages in Spanish to best support our incoming bilingual educators. And I would say, all in all, we really just wanted to be thoughtful about how we were engaging with candidates as people and considering what they really needed during this time, not just as applicants, but as humans processing the realities of a pandemic and the uncertainties that came along with that. So with these three focus areas, we did see steady increases in our applications, even weeks where we had the highest jumps in the entire season. So I do believe much of that success can be attested to some of the strategies and efforts our team put forth. I will note one important thing to just share is that around mid-May, we learned that some of our credentialing requirements would be lifted for next school year, which was a huge win for us in the sense that candidates didn't have to have that additional barrier to entry as they would in a typical year. But I am very proud to share that we are now not only on track, but ahead of our projections for this point in our season. And if we can actually just go one slide back, I'm happy to address next question, Leslie.
It's exciting news for sure and great data. The human-centered approach is truly important. So thank you for highlighting that. Outside of those resources and that approach, can you speak to how you're able to get school leaders to engage with candidates virtually throughout this process?
Yes, next slide, please. So our team's ultimate goal is ensuring that every classroom has a great teacher in it on the first day of school. So as a team, one of our milestone goals at the outset of this season was around early hiring, specifically how we could use talent as a lever for equity and being really as intentional as possible about top talent being hired at our schools furthest from opportunity. So as you can see in this graphic, we know there's a very clear correlation between when a candidate is hired and their ultimate performance on impact, which is our internal teacher evaluation system. When we moved to an all virtual space, we didn't want to lose sight of our goals relative to early hiring. We also realized, however, that virtual hiring was uncharted territory for the majority of our school leaders. So if we wanted to hire early, or have any hiring for that matter, we would need to prioritize supporting school leaders during this unprecedented time. One of the main ways that we have historically and continue to support school leaders was through one-on-one outreach and resume support. So every one of our school leaders is assigned a cluster point of contact from our team who regularly shares top candidates for vacancies. Additionally, our team has built out over the past few years a very robust platform that integrates our Salesforce data with a quick base application that allows school leaders to access all of our approved hiring pool candidates in one place. So this was a tool that school leaders continue to have as they search for top talent this year, and allowed them to filter by content area, licensure status, while also reviewing candidate resumes and any other application materials. I think for this year, we knew, again, that we would need to do more than just provide resume support in this candidate platform. So we did plan and host 2 virtual hiring best practices sessions for all of our school leaders that showed them how to translate their current process into a virtual setting. During these sessions, we also discussed how to conduct a sample teach, how to clearly define their school's value proposition, and then also how to ensure that there was equity in their school level hiring practices as well. So beyond that, we've also put together a number of resources, some of which I know we'll be sharing out throughout this webinar to provide additional virtual hiring tips and key information.
Thank you so much for that, Veronica. As she mentioned, there will be resources provided by Digital Promise following this webinar. We want to make sure that we get any of the questions that we can to address teacher recruitment and selection. If you can go ahead and notate any of the questions you have in the Q&A. Maggie, I'm going to transition to you. If you can highlight any questions that you see there before we get ready to address school leader recruitment and selection.
Absolutely. And while we give listeners just a moment to drop any questions in the chat, thank you again, Veronica, for sharing some of the team's work toward making sure we have equitable outcomes for our students. I also wanted to share just a few highlights from Veronica and the team while people are entering some of the questions. One was, first off, at this moment of time, we've actually received more than 2,700 teacher applications. So what is remarkable about this feat is that we're trending very close to where we were last year and even beyond in our regular setting, where teams would be on the road for this entire season going to universities and job fairs. Also, as we as an agency have centered equity in all of our work, we wanted to make sure that we also centered it in our teacher and school leader selection and recruitment as well. So I know that John King was actually with you all a few weeks ago for one of the recent webinars. One of the pieces of advice that he offered was to think strategically about how we are increasing males of color to enter the education arena. I think at the time he cited that the national average is 2%. Well, we're very happy and pleased that because of Veronica and the team's laser-like focus on making sure that we have a representative educator force, we are running 7 times the national average as it relates to recruiting males of color. So just another highlight that I wanted to share. One of the questions that came in from the school teacher side before we transition to the school leader side is, let's see here, for a suburban school district with 80, thank you for this question, guys. For a suburban school district with 80% white students and 95% white staff, what would you consider to be the most effective first steps we can take to begin to hire candidates of color? So Veronica, as you think about that question, what might be some strategies that they might consider in terms of recruiting more educators of color?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. It's definitely, we're very proud of the work that we've done, especially as a very diverse district in terms of our own student demographics. I think relative to that specific question, I think, infusing some of the elements that I did address, that human-centered approach, I think is a really big thing that really was a game changer for our work. And really speaking with the communities and folks that we were looking to partner with and asking them very directly, like, what is it that you need? What would you like this to be like? And how can we best support you in reaching those goals? So I think that is a great place to start. And I think also as well, as you think about your overall recruitment strategy, consider again, like, how can I make this more inclusive and equitable? You don't have necessarily the personnel or staff that's reflective of that at the moment. Where is a good place to begin, and making sure that you're building that pipeline out over several years, bringing in current teachers, parents, even students into that process as well, and really embracing diversity in that way as well. And then again, similar to like what we have done, just be very, very intentional about where it is that you're looking. So we're very proud to recruit most of our teachers from the District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia, that surrounding area, but also considering other areas within the United States or even beyond internationally, that could be potential places teachers who'd be interested in coming to your district.
Thank you. And I know we'll have another moment in time toward the end to answer some of the additional questions that we encourage you to put in the Q&A. And Leslie, I'll pass it back to you. Thank you, Veronica. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you so much, Maggie. So we're now going to get ready to transition to school leader recruitment and selection. We all know that second to classroom instruction, school leader effectiveness is truly key to driving achievement. And so we want to dig into some of the very innovative things our team is doing as it relates to school leader recruitment and selection virtually. Sheena and JuDonn, can you just tell us a bit about the context around the scope of recruitment, selection, and hiring for school leaders?
Absolutely. Thank you, Leslie. I'll start off by talking a little bit just to kind of give an overview of our entire school leader selection recruitment process. Our school leaders, candidates go through a very rigorous process in order to make it into our approved pool. It's a multi-step process. First, with them having to engage in an instructional video where they have to watch a video and give feedback and rate teachers' performance. From there, they have to conduct and submit a performance task that is scored and viewed by members of the leadership development team who are all past school leaders. So having the lens of effective leadership and effective vision to make sure that we are able to really hone into some of those things that we're looking for. From there, candidates have an opportunity to interview in person with multiple members of DCPS. So they would interview with current school principals, central office staff, instructional superintendents. And then once they pass that round, then they interview with senior leadership, which is comprised of our deputy chancellor and our chief of elementary and secondary schools, depending on which tier you are interested in being a school leader. And then from there, once you pass that round, and then you make it into our approved pool. And those candidates that are currently in our approved pool have the opportunity to then go onto community panels and panel with community members from various schools that are the right fit for them. And so that's kind of given the scope of our kind of whole process. Once candidates make past the community panel round, then they interview with our chancellor, and the chancellor makes the final decision on selection and placement of school leaders. So that just kind of gives a overview of our entire process.
Thank you, Sheena, for that. Just kind of giving us an idea of how things happened pre-COVID. But as we ran virtually connected to how to move the ship forward, can you talk a bit about your scope of the work now that we are in COVID?
Absolutely. So I think as you kind of think about that entire process, the two main areas that were impacted the most by moving virtually were the areas around our community panel, our senior leadership interview process, and our community panel process. And so we already had a very clear, organized way in which we conducted in-person interviews. And so it wasn't necessarily a heavy lift to move our in-person interviews with principals and instructional superintendents virtually. That was an easier shift. I think we really had to rethink and be more strategic about how do we then engage an entire community in the community panel process, which is comprised of 14 to 15 different community members that sit on a panel to interview a candidate. How do you coordinate with all these different people, and then also ensure that the community has what they need technology-wise in order to engage in that process virtually is something that we had to really rethink what that looks like in order to make sure that we can actively engage every community member as we value their feedback. And it's a big part in how we select principals to lead in certain schools. So we really had to lean on our community action team to really help us with that work. And we'll talk a little bit more what that looks like as we get further along in the presentation.
Thank you, Sheena. Our team was truly strategic around ensuring which candidates would panel at which schools. Sheena, can you talk more about how you were able to ensure that equitable process was present throughout each stage?
Absolutely. So if we can go to the next slide. One of the things that we really value at DCPS is the idea of equity and ensuring that everything that we do, equity is threaded throughout it, whether it is what is happening at the school level or what is happening in our policies and procedures and just protocols that we put in place. And so pre-COVID, you know, we had already started conversations around how do we ensure that the candidates that we select to panel at particular schools, that we are looking at them through a lens of equity and using data to inform what makes the most sense for certain candidates to panel at which schools. And so we decided to design what we call an equitable vacancy matching protocol, where we talk to a number of different stakeholders and use data to inform not only just what the needs of the schools are, but what do the skills that candidates possess and experiences they have that are the right skill set to address the needs of a particular school. And so what we really did was look at how do we take the input from the principal supervisor and use that to create a comprehensive needs assessment, that we looked at that to pair that up with the skill set of a candidate in order to match up who makes the most sense to be able to panel at particular school, who is the right group of people that if selected could go into a school, address their needs, and help take that school to the next level. So if we want to go to the next slide. So you'll see in previous years, you know, a lot of the times when we were determining which school leaders paneled at which school, a lot of it was based on the input of the principal supervisor. And I think that is extremely valuable. The principal supervisor knows what the school needs. It knows the strengths, the weaknesses, so that is critical. And so we decided to build upon that this year and not only just take the input of the principal supervisor, but also use that information to create a comprehensive school needs assessment for that particular school, where we took into consideration what are the strengths and the areas of opportunity for this particular school, what's working, what's not working, and what does a successful school leader need to have in order to be a successful leader transitioning into this particular school. In addition to looking at a comprehensive needs assessment, we also decided to create what we call candidate profiles, where we use input from the candidates of their strengths and weaknesses, but we also ask candidates to submit data that demonstrates their effectiveness. So they submit data around instruction, talent, community engagement, culture building. And so we use all of those different pieces to create a candidate profile where we're able to really highlight the strengths and the areas of growth of every candidate. And from there, we kind of look at those two as our starting point to figure out, okay, initially, these are the schools, these are the needs that they have, and this is the skill set that a candidate has. And then like that is how we begin the process of having conversations about which candidates make the most sense to panel at which school. The third part of our vacancy matching protocol is really taking into consideration the hopes and dreams of the community. We feel strongly that the input of community is critical to ensuring that, we really get their input in choosing, and taking into consideration what they think makes a good school leader for their school. And so we also ask for community input for them to also give us their hopes and dreams for the school, what they're looking for in a school leader. And then we use all those different pieces to triangulate that data to figure out who are the top 3 or 4 candidates that are currently in our pool that are the right fit for this school based on the needs assessment, based on the candidate profile and based on the hopes and dreams of the school community. So we use all those pieces to kind of design a panel matrix of who will panel at what school, but it's grounded in data and trying as much as possible to take the subjectivity out of the decision making.
Thank you so much for that, Sheena. This referenced the school profile that she mentioned. Really excited about that. We'll be sharing that resource as well after this webinar.
And if we want to click to the next slide, is just a brief picture of some of the questions that we ask our families when we engage with them during the community panel process. Prior to selecting candidates to panel at schools, we always ask communities these questions. What is happening at the school that you want to see continue? What are your hopes and dreams for the community? And what are the characteristics you are looking for in a new principal, as to make sure that we are getting input from the community. And even if you are a community member who cannot sit on the panel because there's just not enough slots for everybody, we still hear your feedback. We still take it in consideration when we are selecting who should be sitting on those panels.
We can transition to the next slide. Thank you so much. And so it's truly innovative things that we are excited about that our team is pushing forward in this virtual landscape. We are definitely not compromising the high standards that we always maintain for school leaders, but we want to hear more, JuDonn and Sheena, about how you're able to prepare candidates for this virtual community panel experience, as well as JuDonn, as you get into what does this look like to ensure that candidates are ready to move forward, they feel that they're being set up for success as well for the chancellor interview. Can you both talk a bit more about that?
Absolutely. So I'll start talking a little bit about how we prepare our communities for the virtual community panel engagement. Again, this is something that we had to really think strategically about. We're used to having our community panels in person. And so thinking about how we can engage 15 different people, and some of them being teachers, community members, business owners, parents, just a number of different people who are invested in the school community. It's important that we set them up to be successful, especially in a virtual setting. And so, in order for us to engage with our communities, we always, start off that process by hosting info sessions for each school community, where we talk about the process, we talk about what will happen on panel day, we talk about who makes up the panel, we talk about how community members can nominate people within their community. We talk about how teachers nominate other teachers that work at the school to be a part of the panel, and then the community gets an opportunity to vote on who should sit on their community panel. And the community panel, again, is comprised of about 14 to 15 people made up of teachers, support staff, parents, and other community members that are invested in the school. And then from there, we really lean on our community action team, which each community action team member supports a cluster of different schools. And so they really have a pulse on the needs of the school. They try to filter, anything that may be coming up for the school, and they support the school and kind of serve as the liaison between the community and DCPS. And so we really lean on our community action team to support that process of making sure that nominations go smoothly, to make sure that community knows who is sitting on their panel. And then the second part of that is that communities have an opportunity to develop their own questions that they want to ask the candidates that sit in front of them to interview for the school. And so because they have a lens of like what they're looking for, or like the strengths and weaknesses, or what they would like to see continue, we lean into our community action team to really work with that panel of 13 to 15 people to develop strong, solid questions that really address the concerns and the needs that the community panel feels are most important to hear responses from candidates. And so our community action team does a really good job of supporting that process, and they've been able to take it virtually and organize meetings where the entire panel comes together prior to the interview day to develop these questions and helping them navigate what makes sense. Is this question too lofty? Is this too much information? And so really helping them parse out what makes the most sense for a quality question. And then the day of the panel, our team is there to facilitate the entire process. And so the only thing the panelists have to worry about is coming in, asking their question, and we facilitate the day. So that takes that pressure off of them. And so we're there to collect their feedback and move forward with next steps. So that's how we support our communities to make sure that they can actively engage in that process. And so I'll turn it over to JuDonn to talk a little bit about how we make sure that our candidates are able to navigate this virtual space in light of everything that's going on.
Thanks, Sheena. So our team sees feedback as an additional and an important lever for equity as well. So when we talk about having community panels, and this year we had, I think, 12 total for 12 different schools, we want to also take the feedback from our communities and treat it seriously. So after every season, we're in conversation with each other about what do we hear from our community panels about our panelists, and then what can we do with that feedback. Last year, the feedback suggested that candidates who did significant research on the school community and then surfaced that research in their answer, they demonstrated a sign of respect for that school community that meant a lot. So this year, we equipped our candidates with that feedback. For this season, panels were really sensitive to candidates who did not come in with a vision for how do we re-enter schools safely with COVID considerations. As well as those who were, yes, collaborative in their vision setting, but they wanted to see candidates also have their own vision for the school. So then we come to the point where we say, well, what do we do with this feedback and how do we use it in preparing our candidates? So as we continue to build out our principal pipeline, it's also really important for us to continue to invest in the development and the growth of our prospective principal candidates. We don't get them to the application process and then say, well, tough, you're on your own. No, we really want to continue working with them, specifically around community panels. So virtually, we hosted a night in which we brought all of our prospective candidates together, and we worked them through 4 different sessions, lasting about a total of 90 minutes. The first session was for everyone. It was a high-level overview of what panels are, the logistics, how they would engage with the panel. The second was to help candidates get better at their resumes, to make them polished and clean, to communicate all the things they wanted. The third session was delivering a captivating 2.5-minute intro so that they hooked the panel from the very start of their interview. And then lastly, live practice and feedback around actual questions in which they could get in the process of not only delivering an answer, but hearing feedback on how they did on it. So to that end, learning for us is really important. It is continuous. And I just want to acknowledge in the chat a question from Julana Smith-Hunter. The question reads, how do you address equity and diversity training for new hires who want to be effective, but are in need of support with connecting with diverse learners? So I'm thankful to be a part of a district that has a strong equity framework and equity commitment in place. One of the ways that we commit to that is we partner with Glenn Singleton's organization, Courageous Conversations, who is able to come in and provide resources and training around engaging in conversations about race and about racial equity. That involves like the individual personal intake, as well as the collective, how does this impact our day-to-day practices as educators? So we hosted a 2-week Reopen Strong PD for our teachers at the end of this year. Courageous Conversations was an optional session for folks. We had 1,600 educators across the district opt into that. That's also going to continue next week in our new principal orientation, where we're hosting a principal panel on equity leadership for our veteran principals to address our new principals about what were your responses to COVID, where did equity issues surface, as well as how do you as a leader of color work to not only support and sustain yourself in the work, but also your staff when we're dealing with a pandemic on race, and specifically the murder of Black and brown men. So how do we as leaders engage ourselves and our staff around that? We believe learning is really important to that. Everyone's at different places. We need to be able to provide the tools and the resources to do so. Next slide, please.
Thank you so much, JuDonn and Sheena, for elaborating on the school leader recruitment and selection process. We want to make sure that we address these questions that are coming in as well. We know this work is important and we are all doing our best to navigate these uncharted waters of COVID. Maggie, I'm going to transition to you to see if we can highlight some of the questions in the Q&A.
Thank you for that, and thank you for sharing, everybody. As we spend our last bit of time together, we really do want to be responsive to some of the challenges and thoughts. So once again, we encourage you to put the questions into the chat, or excuse me, into the question and answer section, and we'll be able to read them as well. So first off, I noticed a question from Miss Rainey, so thank you for chiming in here. She says this: when recruiting candidates of color, what types of systems of support are in place? Working in these environments can be a very traumatizing experience, even with the most extensive training and expertise. There are nuances and layers of discrimination that impact administrative health and longevity. Do you have a system to assess racially charged intangibles subtly directed at recruited school leaders and teachers of color? Have these issues subsided with the transition of online learning? Finally, as folks of color matriculate through the pipeline, equity pushback intensifies. Is there an overt plan for addressing these recruits' long-term well-being? So thank you very much, Lori, for those types of questions. Again, I encourage everyone to continue putting them in the Q&A. So the first thing I'll say to address Lori's question, and team chime in for any missing parts as well, is we recently were invited to watch a webinar with Dr. Ibram Kendi. He's the author of How to Be Anti-Racist. One of the things that struck me about his segment is he says that we're not talking about the individual racist necessarily, you know, that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is if there is ever a situation where there are racialized outcomes in any of our data, whether that be who gets suspended versus who gets sent to AP courses versus who do we retain in our teacher and school leader worlds, whenever there's a racialized outcome, there likely is a policy or system in place that is producing that racialized outcome. So one of the things we've been trying to do to be strategic here in District of Columbia Public Schools is to analyze the systems and structures that are in place. We're not just talking about a training that we do. We think training is incredibly important, but thinking about all the systems, whether that be where are we recruiting? Are we recruiting at HSIs, Hispanic serving institutions? What is our relationship between HBCUs in the area and beyond? What does the system of training look like versus onboarding look like versus professional learning? So some of the chiefs, for example, that we work with, including our chief, Chief Elliott, she has said, if you are in my office and you are a manager or above, you go through mandatory equity training every year. So every 6 weeks we engage in, for example, equity leads training. Now she has mental health professionals and the recruitment team, everybody under her, lots of folks. What she's challenging us to think about is, I don't care what your role is here in central office, we are all equity leaders. So whether it be how you recruit or how you serve mental health, provide services in our district, how are you holding up the lens of equity? So it's not by happenstance that we are trying to lead the nation, again, 7 times the national average of recruiting males of color. We are being very intentional about the systems of professional learning. We are weaving that through our entire new principal orientation and beyond. The entire monthly PLC that principals are in, we're continuing that as a focus. We're thinking about how it relates to onboarding 500-600 new teachers every year. How do we place, when we're trying to think about, for example, what are the onboarding sessions that a new teacher has to experience? Well, we obviously know that you have to know how you're being evaluated. You have to know your content and curriculum. But we're also saying as a district, to elevate our value of courage, that you have to go through this equity session. You have to reflect on this. And this will be a part of your onboarding experience. So I'll stop there, if Lori, if you have any follow-ups, and I'll answer a few other questions as well. This one's coming in from Elena. What role do principal supervisors play in the community interviews and the panel process? How is this data used to make final recommendations for hiring decisions? Sheena, would you mind taking that? What role do our instructional soups play? Very important role.
Absolutely. So again, like I said before, the instructional superintendents have a role in helping to craft the comprehensive needs assessment based on the needs of the school. For the community panel process, they are there as a support. They are there to lean in as the community needs them. Primarily, our community action team leads the question development, but our instructional superintendents are also a part of that process to lend a hand and to kind of provide context to community panels as they are crafting their questions. On the day of panels, our instructional superintendents, they are a part of the panel. They do not ask questions, as that is the community's time, but they are there listening into every candidate's responses, taking their own notes, listening to the feedback of the community before making final recommendations of who should move forward to the chancellor. And so once those recommendations are made, move forward to the chancellor based on input from the community, input from the instructional superintendent, the chancellor then gets a full comprehensive scope of feedback of each candidate throughout the entire process. And so they are able to see how they performed. He is able to see how they perform an in-person interview. He gets their profile. He gets the needs assessment. He gets the feedback from the community. He gets the feedback and recommendation from the instructional superintendent. And then those candidates actually interview with the chancellor, and the chancellor uses all those all that information, all those data points to make a final decision on who is selected for hire for those particular schools. So the instructional superintendent is very heavily involved in the process. They're able to give their feedback. They're able to hear every candidate, hear every response, and also lean into what are the needs of the school and what are the responses that these candidates are saying that lend an ear to, like, this might be a person that's a good fit for this school prior to making their final recommendations to the chancellor.
Thank you for that, Sheena. And again, we invite you for any additional questions. The other thing I'll add on to Sheena's response is when we think about the instructional superintendents, who are the supervisors of the principals, what we've tried to do through our equitable vacancy matching protocol is to think about, frankly, a checks and balances system. We know that research says that sometimes there are biases that all of us might have. One of them, I think, is called the Me Too bias. So I'm a young lady from Flint, Michigan. When I find folks that happen to be from the Midwest scrappy town, there's something about them I like. What we want to do is make sure that we try to mitigate those biases and have a proper checks and balances system where, though the principal supervisor will recommend somebody, sometimes you recommend somebody based on them looking like you or being something, that you like. So we want to make sure that that's balanced out with what the chief of school, deputy chancellor, and chancellor ultimately decide. So thank you for that question. One of the additional questions, I want to loop back to Veronica for a moment to talk about some of our teacher recruitment and selection work. Very proud of the fact that, again, we talked about the conversion rates. I think she dropped in the chat about being around 83%, I think, at this time. The other thing I think that is impressive about this number is we're not talking about just 83% overall. When we think of our most challenged schools, our schools that have a one-star rating or comprehensive status related to ESSA, we're also at 82% for those schools as well. So it's not just overall, and some of our struggling schools are, not where they need to be, but overall, we're looking really, really good. One of the questions, Veronica, they mentioned was, can you talk a little, you mentioned here about the audit that we do every single year for our questions. We know that, again, questions are a system of who we're trying to funnel in or out of our school system. Veronica, can you talk a little bit about what we do with our audit every year to make sure that we are absolutely sifting and screening for the types of candidates that we think will be equity leaders as teachers?
Yeah, absolutely. So our selection team does this audit, and we engage a number of stakeholders from across not just our team, central office, but also school leaders and current teachers to ensure that our process is aligned to some of our core competencies. So the 3 core competencies on our specific team are core values and beliefs, instructional expertise, and then also student achievement focus. So I know this past year, we specifically zoomed in on that core values and belief piece. So as a team, we engaged again with like hundreds of folks to really ensure that what we were looking for in candidates was that mindset around their core values and ensuring that it was aligned with what we believe as a district. And I know there's been some questions posed on like, how do we train teachers? How do we support them once they're here? on our end, it's really like, how are we getting at that mindset piece throughout our application process? So what we specifically were looking for in that specific competency was a couple of things. First and foremost, do you believe that all students can achieve at high levels, regardless of what their circumstance may be? Another piece of that that's huge for our team is getting at that mindset around parent engagement and involvement. These are things that are asked not only in our initial application, but also in the phone interview that all candidates are required to go through. And those interviews are led by current DCPS teachers. So we have a group of about 60 current DCPS teachers, highly effective educators from across our district, who actually spearhead all over 2,000 phone interviews that we conduct every single year. And they too are also getting that rigorous training in equity and bias, and ensuring that every single year that they are critical of how they are evaluating candidates with that lens as well.
Thank you, team, so much for highlighting those great aspects of our work and just making sure that equity lives and breathes in all facets of our work. Maggie, if there are no more questions that you want to note from the chat, I'll just transition to you to begin to close this out. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you for that. I do have one final question that I wanted to have JuDonn respond to as it relates to Rainey really quickly. Go ahead, JuDonn.
Yep. So embedded in your question is just like, how do we create systems of support for leaders and teachers of color coming into the system? And I think we have a really powerful commitment from our chancellor to say, like, yes, I want you to go out and find more Latinx educators. Yes, I want you to go out and find more male educators of color. But then to your question, it's not enough to bring people into the system, but then you also have to nurture their growth and development. So we're in the process of building out cohorts at the teacher leader level, both for male educators of color and those who have served in a dual language school capacity and or are bilingual. Because we've noticed in listening to these folks that they're like, I'm out here on an island. There's not a whole lot of folks who look like me. My journey is hard and I need support. So just a quick highlight to share. A week after George Floyd was murdered, our chancellor joined us for a call on our Male Educators of Color collaborative convening and just spoke about his experience as a Black male, both as a human and as a professional. And it was a really powerful sign of solidarity and commitment to, again, not only bring folks in, but to nurturing their growth and development.
Thank you for that, JuDonn. So as we transition, and thank you, Lori, thank you for the comments, everyone. As we transition, I want us to just be thinking about, if there was one takeaway, we've provided a few artifacts. We'd be very happy to hear from anyone. We'll leave our email information and things like that. But if you have one takeaway from this particular session, it would really be about how, or the question or charge I would give to you all is, how are you infusing systems of equity throughout your policies and procedures as it relates to recruitment, selection, and placement of both teachers and school leaders? What does that, you infusing equity throughout those systems look like? Additionally, as we transition to looking at the very next webinar series that's coming up, we recognize here in DCPS that we're going through a lot of things and a lot of challenges together as a nation. We think about, a lot of people say that we're going through 2 pandemics at the same time. So how are we using talent as a lever for equity? So those are some of the things that we're continuing to toil with. With that, I'm going to leave you with the next webinar that's coming next week, as well as a quote to leave you on your way. So the next webinar will be supporting principal supervisors during distant learning. That'll be Tuesday at 1 p.m. Hopefully you can join us for that. And I'll leave you with a quote. It's about the year 2020, and we're all grappling with this together. It says this: what if 2020 isn't canceled? What if 2020 is the year we've all been waiting for? A year so uncomfortable, so painful, so scary, so raw, that it finally forces us to grow. A year that screams so loud, finally awakening us from our ignorant slumber. A year we finally accept the need for change, declare change, work for change, become the change. A year that we finally band together instead of pushing each other further apart. 2020 isn't canceled, but rather the most important year of them all. We invite you to the next session. Thank you to all of our listeners. and be well. Signing off, DCPS.